Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this really comforting expectation of just absolute precision.
Right, yeah, like engineering or something.
Exactly. You fall off a bike, your arm is throbbing, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that, that jagged, undeniable white line right on the screen. The doctor just points a pen at it and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Right, it's totally binary. It's objective. I mean, you don't have to sit there and debate the philosophy of the bone. It's broken or it's not.
Yeah, and honestly, there is a deep psychological comfort in that. We love things that are visible. We love things we can categorize. When something is wrong in our lives, we desperately want our problems to be things we can just, point a physical finger at on a chart. Like, fix this specific spot right here and I'll be fine.
But then you step out of the physical realm and into the world of human character, right? You step into immorality, the human heart, personal integrity, and suddenly that x-ray machine is, well, it's entirely useless. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Oh, totally muddy waters.
Yeah. I mean, how do you measure the health of a person's soul? How do you accurately diagnose pride or deep-seated insecurity or just a rebellious spirit? You can't exactly put a stethoscope to a person's ego.
No, you really can't. Most of the time, we just rely on observing people's grand actions over, like, years to figure out who they really are. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place entirely? What if there actually was an X-ray machine for the human heart?
Which is a wild thought.
Right. What if there was a perfectly accurate, highly visible, constantly running diagnostic tool that revealed exactly what was going on inside of you every single day?
And that right there is the staggering premise of the material we're diving into today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a really profound ethical and psychological study. It's drawn from a comprehensive lecture series by Dr. Greg Bahnsen alongside the accompanying study PDFs.
And we're going to treat each of those audio lectures and its PDF as a single, unified lecture unit to make sure we cover it all.
Exactly. And the entire 7-part curriculum is centered on a concept that sounds, I guess, simple on the surface, but it's actually terrifying in its implications. And that is mouth control.
Yeah, so Bahnsen uses the ancient biblical texts of Proverbs and the book of James, not just as, religious documents, but as absolute masterclasses in human psychology.
Yeah.
And the core argument he pulls from them is that our linguistic habits, like the literal way we use our tongues, the words we choose, the tone we employ, they aren't just matters of social etiquette.
Right. It's not about being a polite conversationalist at a dinner party.
Exactly. Your linguistic habits are the ultimate, unerring diagnostic tool for your inner character. Your words are the x-ray of your soul.
And I'll tell you, this journey is practically guaranteed to step on your toes. Because, well, we all have this tendency to compartmentalize, right? We think, sure, I have a bit of a temper, I gossip a little bit, but deep down, I'm a good person.
Oh, yeah, the classic, defense.
Yes. But this material fundamentally rejects that premise. It argues that you simply cannot sever your vocabulary from your character. The two are inextricably linked.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to move systematically through all 7 lecture units, making sure we get a perfectly balanced sweep of the whole series. No rushing, no skipping. So starting with lecture unit 1, it introduces a concept that you wouldn't necessarily associate with cocking. It goes all the way back to the root cause of human failure, like the biblical story of Adam and Eve. And that concept is autonomy.
Autonomy is the foundational bedrock of this entire framework. If we break the word down, deriving from the ancient Greek, auto means self, and nomos means law. So autonomy literally translates to being a law unto yourself.
Which, in our modern Western culture, that's usually pitched as a great thing. We love autonomy. We celebrate the self-made person, the independent thinker, the rebel who plays by their own rules.
We absolutely do. But from a classical theological perspective, autonomy is the essence of cosmic rebellion. The lecture and the study guide posit that human rebellion, right from the Garden of Eden, wasn't just about eating a piece of fruit. It was fundamentally an issue of autonomy. It was the conscious choice by humanity to choose self-rule over divine rule.
Like saying, I'm in charge now.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's looking at the creator of the universe and saying, I will be my own ultimate authority. I will define what is right and wrong for myself. It is the total rejection of any external moral standard in favor of the self.
Okay, so if human beings have this deep primal drive to be a law unto themselves, you would naturally think that this rebellious autonomy would be most vividly seen in our grand physical actions. Like if I'm a rebel, you'd think you'd see it in the things I do with my hands. Grand acts of defiance, violence, stealing, burning things down.
Well, the obvious stuff.
Yeah. But the text argues no. The ultimate indicator of this rebellion is actually seen in our mouths. And I read that and thought, wait, why? Why is the mouth singled out as the ultimate indicator of rebellion? Why are words considered more dangerous than actions in this curriculum?
It's a brilliant question, and to answer it, Lecture Unit 1 leans heavily on an analogy from the 3rd chapter of the book of James. James asks us to picture a horse. You have this massive, incredibly powerful animal, over 1,000 pounds of raw muscle and instinct.
Yeah, huge beast.
Right. Yet, you put a tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of metal a bit into its mouth, and through that tiny instrument, you can steer the entire beast. You dictate its direction, its speed, its whole trajectory.
So the bit controls the beast.
Precisely. The material argues that human speech operates on the exact same principle, but internally. Think about it. The mouth requires the most micro-level, high-frequency self-regulation of any human faculty. Engaging your arm to throw a punch or engaging your legs to run away, that requires a relatively massive conscious commitment to a physical action. It takes time.
Yeah, you have to really decide to do it.
But opening your mouth and letting a sarcastic, cutting, destructive remark fly, that happens in a fraction of a millisecond.
It's almost instinctual. It just bypasses our cognitive filters so easily.
Exactly. Therefore, if you can control the mouth, the thing that operates on an absolute hair trigger, the thing that is statistically the hardest to govern, you can control the rest of the body. And the logic flows backwards, too. If you are failing to govern your mouth, it indicates a total systemic failure of internal governance. A runaway mouth is the absolute clearest proof of an autonomous, rebellious heart.
Wow. And this totally shatters a myth that I think every single one of us was taught on the playground. You know the old rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Oh, yeah. The curriculum absolutely eviscerates that idea. It argues that physical broken bones are, in many ways, actually preferable to a broken spirit caused by bitter, deceitful words.
Which is such a profound observation about human psychology. I mean, a broken bone heals in 6 weeks. It leaves a calcified mark on an x-ray, sure, but it stops hurting. But a broken spirit, a child who is constantly told by a parent that they are worthless, or a spouse subjected to years of subtle undermining sarcasm, that psychological damage can literally last a lifetime.
It completely rewires the brain. The text treats words as having immense, lethal, destructive power. They are not invisible. Their impact is overwhelmingly tangible.
Which brings us to a demand for what the curriculum calls straight talk. It's this idea that every single time we open our mouths, we are making a micro decision. We are either submitting to a higher moral law, speaking truth, offering grace, building up, or we are acting autonomously, being a law unto ourselves, bending reality to fit our ego.
And that naturally pushes us to look deeper, right into Lecture Unit 2. Because if the mouth is the steering wheel of autonomy, what is fueling the engine? Why do certain words come out in the first place?
Yes, the connection between the heart and the mouth. And Unit 2 provides what might be my favorite, most vivid analogy of the entire study. It asks you to picture a little kid who sneaks into the kitchen and raids the cookie jar. The mom walks in, and the kid swears up and down. I didn't eat an Oreo. I haven't touched them. But they have, like chocolate crumbs and white frosting smeared all over their cheeks.
It's such a great image. Or, in a slightly darker context, a cheating husband who comes home and lies to his wife, completely oblivious to the bright red lipstick on his collar.
It's a tragically comedic image, but the theological point is devastating. The point is, your inner character is smeared all over your face. You simply cannot hide who you truly are when you speak.
Right.
The words you choose, the specific adjectives you use, the tone, the timing, it is all Oreo crumbs. You might think you are a deeply kind, patient person on the inside, but if you are constantly snapping at waiters or leaving passive-aggressive comments online, well, the crumbs are on your face. The inside is undeniably leaking out.
It really strips away all of our pretenses. We love the idea of the private self, this idea that our inner thoughts are completely isolated from our public persona, but this lecture insists on the binary nature of speech. Drawing from Proverbs, it asserts that there is absolutely no neutral ground in human communication.
Wait, really? No neutral ground at all? What about just, talking about the weather? Or asking someone to pass the salt?
Well, the underlying argument is that even in the mundane, your posture towards the person you're speaking to is revealed. Proverbs categorizes the mouth into 2 distinct camps. It is either a fountain of life, meaning it brings health, vitality, encouragement, and healing to the ecosystem around you, or it is smeared with violence.
And the imagery it uses for that violence is intense. It doesn't say a wicked mouth is like a mild annoyance. It compares it to a maul, which is a heavy hammer, a sword, or a sharp arrow, it's a lethal weapon.
Exactly. It suggests that every conversation either leaves the other person slightly more alive or slightly more dead. There is no middle category where your words just float off into the ether without impact.
Which leads to an extrapolation in the text that, frankly, just stops you dead in your tracks. It introduces the concept of the divine tape recorder.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, this part actually gave me a serious spike of anxiety.
Referencing the Gospel of Matthew, the lecture paints this striking, inescapable image. God is operating cosmic tape recorder that never breaks, never gets jammed, and never, ever loses a tape. Every single idle word that a person speaks will be brought up in the day of judgment. Nothing is off the record. The microphone is always hot.
Okay, I have to jump in here because if I'm listening to this and I really internalize that idea, that every idle word, every offhand comment in traffic, every poorly constructed joke, every moment of frustration with my kids is on a permanent divine record, my immediate reaction is total conversational paralysis. I mean, how do we ever speak freely again? Doesn't this just breed a culture of terror where everyone is afraid to say anything lest it be used against them in a cosmic court of law?
It is a highly rational reaction to feel dread when confronted with omniscience, for sure. But we have to look closely at how Dr. Bahnsen contextualizes this terror in the study guide. It is not designed to be a demand for generalized neurotic anxiety. It is a demand for alignment. You have to remember the core premise. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The words are just the diagnostic output.
So the tape recorder isn't the actual problem. The source material being recorded is the problem.
Exactly. If your heart is full of bitterness, massive ego, pride, and selfishness, then yes, the divine tape recorder is a terrifying concept, and you probably should be paralyzed. You should probably stop talking. But the goal of this material isn't to artificially stifle a wicked heart by just clamping your hand over your mouth and sweating through life.
Right, that sounds miserable.
The goal is to highlight the desperate need for the heart to be transformed. If the core of who you are is transformed by grace, if you cultivate humility and love, then what naturally overflows, what spills out when you are bumped, what gets caught on that tape recorder, will be gracious. You won't have to fear the hot mic because your internal reality matches your external presentation.
That makes a lot of sense. It shifts the focus from behavior modification, like just trying really hard not to swear, to actual character transformation. The words are the indicator light on the dashboard. You don't fix the engine by putting tape over the light. You pop the hood.
Not the hood, exactly.
But practically speaking, while we are working on popping the hood and transforming the heart, the material does give us a very functional, almost mathematical starting point for dealing with our speech. And this brings us right into Lecture Unit 3. It comes down to a startlingly simple question. Do you foolishly talk too much?
It's a brilliant transition into the sheer volume of our speech. Unit 3 explores the direct statistical correlation between how many words you say and how much you sin. It quotes Proverbs 10.1, which is just a blunt instrument of a verse. In the multitude of words, there wants not transgression. Or, in modern English, where words are many, sin is not absent.
It's basically a probability game. If you talk a lot, you are statistically guaranteed to screw up.
Precisely. Given human nature, given that lingering autonomy and self-worship we discussed in Unit 1, an abundance of words will inevitably eventually contain some sinful utterances. You will eventually slip into a lie, an exaggeration to make yourself look better, a boast, or a piece of juicy gossip. Therefore, the text frames silence in a way that is very countercultural for us today.
Oh, completely. Today, silence is treated as a social defect. If there's a lull in the conversation, we panic. We call it an awkward silence. We assume the person who isn't talking is either ignorant, antisocial, or disengaged.
But the ancient wisdom presented here frames silence not as a lack of social skill, but as a sign of profound spiritual maturity and a tamed art. It contrasts the fool and the wise person. It says a fool vomits out folly. They have no internal filter. Every thought that enters their brain is immediately expelled from their mouth. They just spew.
Ugh.
But a wise person knows how to conceal a matter. They hold their peace. There is even a proverb that notes with a bit of irony that even a fool who shuts his lips is esteemed as prudent. You can literally fake being wise just by closing your mouth and nodding.
It's the ultimate life hack. But honestly, the interpersonal dynamics described in this lecture are so relatable. We all know the person who suffers from a failure of volume control. The opinionated person who feels an intense moral compulsion to comment on literally everything, from geopolitics to the way you load the dishwasher.
Or the conversational narcissist?
Yes. The one-upper. The person who constantly brings every conversation back to themselves. Someone says, oh, I just got back from a beautiful trip to Italy, and this person immediately jumps in with, oh, Italy is nice, but when we went to the Amalfi Coast. They just cannot let a moment exist without inserting themselves into the center of the narrative. It is volume-driven by ego.
I really like how you're framing this. How would you modernize this concept of volume control? What does it look like in practice for us?
You know, I think of it like an unedited movie. Imagine a film director who just leaves the camera rolling for 24 hours straight and publishes every single frame to theaters. You'd see the actors flubbing their lines, the boom mic dropping into the shot, people eating mundane lunches, hours of dead space. It would be an unwatchable disaster.
Right, totally boring.
The art of a great film is entirely in the cutting room. It's what the director chooses not to show. It's the restraint. The editing process is what creates the impact. And we need to be the editors of our own speech.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The art is in the cutting room.
But let me challenge the extreme end of this logic. If talking less reduces the probability of sinning, is the ultimate goal of this curriculum to turn us all into hermits? Should we just join a monastery, take a vow of total silence, and communicate via post-it notes? If words are so dangerous, isn't 0 words the absolute safest bet?
It's a logical extreme for sure, but if we connect this to the overarching theology of the curriculum, the answer is definitively no. Bahnsen clarifies this by pointing to the ultimate model of human behavior presented in the text, Jesus. And Jesus was not a silent hermit. He didn't take a vow of silence.
Right, he was a rabbi. He taught constantly.
Exactly, but the Gospel of John describes his speech with a very specific metric. It says, he spoke only what the Father commanded. He spoke profound truths. He debated scholars. He challenged corrupt authorities. He comforted the broken. He wasn't silent. But he spoke no less than was required and absolutely no more. He never engaged in idle chatter to boost his own ego. He never gossiped to build an alliance.
So it's not about absolute silence. It's about absolute precision.
Precision and restraint. The material is arguing that reducing the raw, unfiltered volume of your speech editing the movie, as you said, is merely the first practical, mechanical step toward gaining moral control over it. You have to reduce the sheer quantity of words before you can hope to improve their quality.
Which is the perfect pivot to Lecture Unit 4. Because once you've learned to stop vomiting folly and you've dialed down the volume, you have to look at the words you do choose to say. And this brings us to the manner of speech. Honestly, this is the part of the material that challenged me the most, because the text explicitly states that being factually correct is not enough. You must speak the truth in the right way.
This is a massive paradigm shift, especially for people who pride themselves on being intellectual or logical. We tend to operate under the assumption that if what we are saying is factually true, if we have the data, if we have the moral high ground, we have a blank check to deliver that truth however we want. We think truth is its own justification.
Right, like, I'm right, so you just have to deal with my delivery.
But the text contrasts 2 very vivid elemental images to destroy that notion. Volcanoes versus apples of gold.
Volcanoes are the fools. They are filled with hot, righteous indignation and raw facts, and they just erupt. They spew this hot lava of truth all over everyone around them, completely oblivious to the fact that they are burning down the village in the process.
And the righteous, on the other hand, operate completely differently. The text says they study to answer. They don't just react, they craft. The proverb says a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Think about the craftsmanship required for that. It's beautiful, it's highly valuable, but most importantly, it is delivered in due season with appropriate measure. It requires immense emotional intelligence, empathy, and timing to deliver truth effectively.
And Unit 4 focuses heavily on the actual mechanics of de-escalating conflict through this manner of speech. It introduces the concept of the soft answer. It says a soft answer turns away wrath, while a grievous word ups the ante. There is this incredible claim that a person who can control their temper and lower their voice in the middle of a heated argument is stronger than a mighty warrior capturing a city. It is literally arguing that it takes more raw, internal human strength to whisper when you're angry than to yell.
And physiologically, that is absolutely true. When you are angry, your amygdala is firing, adrenaline is pumping, your heart rate spikes, your body wants to yell. To override that physiological tsunami and choose a soft, measured tone requires a mastery of the self that most warriors never achieve.
But let me push back on this with a very modern cultural value. In our society right now, we have elevated this concept of brutal honesty. It is constantly praised as a virtue. People put it in their social media bios. I'm brutally honest. I tell it like it is. I don't sugarcoat things. We view tact as a form of weakness or deception. But this text seems to be arguing that brutal honesty is just, well, brutality. How does this framework balance the absolute necessity of speaking hard truths with this rigid demand for gentleness? What if the truth needs to hurt to be effective?
That is the exact friction point where most people abandon this philosophy. The curriculum answers this by demanding we confront our own inherent arrogance. The first thing it notes is that the brutally honest person is almost always operating under the arrogant assumption that they actually possess the complete, unvarnished, objective truth of a situation.
Which they rarely do.
Exactly. The curriculum demands that before we speak, we must assume the posture of humility. We might be wrong. We might only have half the story. We are required to cross-examine our own facts and our own motives. Why do I want to say this? Is it to help them, or is it to vindicate myself?
And even if you are right, what if you genuinely have the facts?
Even when you are unequivocally, factually right, you are commanded to use your words medicinally, not as weapons. If your goal is truly to help the person, you don't perform surgery with a chainsaw. You use a scalpel. You use precision, care, and gentleness to remove the problem without killing the patient. Brutal honesty usually aims to destroy. Medicinal truth aims to heal.
A scalpel, not a chainsaw. I love that distinction. And the stakes for this are shockingly high. The text brings us back to the book of James to redefine what it means to be a religious or moral person.
Yes, and this is where it gets deeply uncomfortable for anyone who thinks they have their spiritual life in order. James says that if a man considers himself to be religious but does not bridle his tongue, he deceives his own heart and his religion is vain. It is entirely empty.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm hearing the weight of that. It's saying that without this specific manner of speech, gentle, careful, restorative, controlled, all of your other religious or moral practices are void. You can go to a place of worship every week. You can give half your income to charity. You can memorize theology. But if you are a volcano who blasts people with your temper or a troll who leaves vicious comments online, God looks at your resume and says, this is worthless.
That is exactly what it is saying. What's fascinating here is how your tongue is the litmus test for the validity of your entire belief system.
Wow, that is a heavy, heavy line to draw, which perfectly sets the stage for Lecture Unit 5. Because once we understand the high calling of being a peacemaker, the text flips the script. It adopts almost a sarcastic reverse psychology tone. It provides us with a literal how-to guide for causing misery. It breaks down the mechanics of conflict by outlining exactly how fools successfully promote strife.
It's an incredibly effective rhetorical device. By showing you the exact blueprint for causing interpersonal explosions, Dr. Bahnsen forces you to recognize these subtle behaviors in your own life. He outlines 4 specific methods, 4 tips for strife.
Let's walk through these because the first one completely caught me off guard. Tip number 1 for promoting strife isn't even a spoken word. It's body language.
Yes, Proverbs explicitly warns against the person who winks with their eye, who signals with their feet, who points with their fingers. It's the eye roll, the compressed lips, the heavy, exaggerated sigh, the twitch of the nose.
Why is this considered so deadly? I mean, it seems so minor compared to actual insults.
It is deadly because of its cowardice. Body language communicates intense disdain, judgment, and rejection, but it leaves absolutely no linguistic fingerprints. It inflicts deep emotional damage and completely derails the spirit of a conversation, but it provides the offender with complete plausible deniability.
Oh, that is so true. The plausible deniability is infuriating. You're in an argument, the other person rolls their eyes to the back of their head, and you get mad and say, "Why are you looking at me like that?" And they instantly throw their hands up and say, "What? I didn't say a word. You're acting crazy. You're imagining things."
Exactly. It's a form of gaslighting. It allows the fool to inject poison into the room while claiming to have empty hands.
Which brings us to tip number 2 for promoting strife. Contentious language. This is the person who is simply always looking for a fight. They shoot from the hip.
We all know this personality. It's the perpetual devil's advocate. They don't actually care about the truth of the matter. They just care about the friction. If you say the sky is blue, they will immediately argue about the exact wavelength of light and tell you it's actually cyan, just to maintain a posture of opposition.
It's exhausting. And tip number 3 is one of the most universal human pastimes: gossip. But the imagery used here is so specific. Proverbs refers to the words of a whisperer as dainty morsels. They go down into the innermost parts of the belly.
It's a profound psychological insight. Why do we love gossip so much? Why is it so hard to resist? Because it is treated like hors d'oeuvres at a fancy party. It feels exclusive. It feels like a delicacy.
Right. When someone leans in and lowers their voice and says, "Hey, did you hear about what happened to Sarah?" You get a physiological dopamine hit. You feel like you are on the inside. You feel superior to the person being talked about. It bonds you and the gossiper together in this toxic little alliance.
But the text warns that these dainty morsels are actually poison. You eagerly swallow them down, but they rot you from the inside out. They destroy trust, they assassinate character, and they warp your own view of humanity.
And finally, tip number 4 for causing strife.
Fair.
Never giving up. Pushing an argument relentlessly. The text uses this bizarre, incredibly graphic proverb. Just as churning milk produces butter, and punching a nose produces blood, pressing wrath produces strife.
It's the refusal to let a matter drop. It's the insistence on having the last word, on proving your point until the other person submits.
This feels like it was written specifically for social media algorithms. I mean, the entire business model of platforms today is based on this proverb. They are designed to churn the milk. They show you things that make you angry. You comment, someone replies, you reply back. And the algorithm just keeps pressing the wrath, churning the milk until it produces the butter of engagement and the blood of real-world hatred.
That is a brilliant modern application.
Yeah.
The churning is the point. So what is the biblical remedy for all of this? How do you stop the strife? The text offers a very clear, almost shockingly blunt solution. Cast out the scoffer, take away the wood, and the fire goes out.
It doesn't say reason with the scoffer or try to understand the scoffer's trauma. It says get rid of them.
Because a scoffer doesn't want resolution. They want a fire. If someone is bringing you the dainty morsels of gossip or rolling their eyes or churning the milk of wrath, you do not engage, you don't supply the oxygen. In fact, the lecture explicitly advises using a stern scowl to shut down gossipers. You don't have to be polite to toxicity. You make it visibly clear that your ears are not a trash can for their contentious words.
If there is a fire, someone is bringing the wood. You just have to stop accepting the deliveries. This logically flows right into Lecture Unit 6, which looks at the anatomy of dysfunction. If the previous section was about how we actively promote strife, this section is about how we respond when conflict inevitably finds us. The material calls these the fool's tools.
And it grounds us in absolute reality. The lecture admits, look, you put any two human beings in a room for long enough, like two-year-olds with one toy, and conflict will happen. We are flawed, finite creatures with competing desires. The central question of maturity is not whether we will offend each other. The question is how we handle the rupture when it occurs. And the fool uses 3 specific tools to absolutely destroy any chance of reconciliation.
Tool number 1 is harping on a matter. And the analogy here is gross, but it will stick in your brain forever. Harping on a matter is like picking at a scab so it never heals.
It is the absolute refusal to let minor grievances go. It's keeping a mental ledger of every wrong ever committed against you and constantly bringing them up like, well, this is just like what you did 3 years ago at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It prevents the wound from ever forming scar tissue. It's the opposite of forgiveness. It's the weaponization of history.
Which leads to tool number 2, which is incredibly common.
Yeah.
Backbiting. The text defines this very specifically. Backbiting is taking a grievance to a third party instead of the actual offender. If I have a problem with you, but instead of talking to you, I go to the break room and complain to our mutual coworker about what a jerk you are, I am backbiting. The Apostle Paul in the book of Galatians calls this devouring one another.
And the third fool's tool is meddling. This is interfering in someone else's argument, inserting yourself into a conflict that does not belong to you. The proverb paints a hilarious but dangerous picture. It likens meddling to walking down the street and just yanking the ears of a vicious passing pit bull.
You are volunteering to get mauled.
Exactly. It's driven by vanity. It's the assumption that your opinion is so universally valuable that every conflict requires your personal intervention. You jump into a comment thread between 2 strangers to offer your hot take, and suddenly you are the target of both their wrath. You pulled the dog's ears.
Okay, I want to camp out on this second tool, backbiting, for a minute, because this is the plague of every workplace, church, and extended family on earth. We know what we are supposed to do. The text cites the famous passage from Matthew 18, which lays out a crystal clear, step-by-step process for conflict resolution. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault, between you and him alone. It is literally a flowchart for adult communication.
Yeah.
So, psychologically, why is it human nature to instead tell 5 other uninvolved people instead of the one person we are actually upset with?
Dr. Bahnsen's insight here cuts right to the bone. He calls this the ostrich game. We avoid the direct frustration of dealing with the actual offender because direct confrontation requires genuine vulnerability.
It is terrifying to look someone in the eye and say, "You hurt me."
It is. It requires immense courage. If you go directly to the person, you risk an uncomfortable argument, you risk them getting defensive or angry, but there's a deeper, more subconscious terror. You risk the potential of being proven wrong. Think about it. If you confront them directly, they have the opportunity to explain themselves. You might find out that you completely misunderstood the situation, or worse, that you were actually the instigator. But if you play the ostrich game, if you bury your head in the sand regarding the actual offender and instead run to a sympathetic third party to complain, you get to completely control the narrative.
You become the undisputed hero and victim of your own story. The third party validates your feelings, strokes your ego, tells you you have every right to be mad, and you never have to face the terrifying vulnerability of truth-seeking. You get the emotional release of venting without any of the hard work of reconciliation.
It is a brilliant, cowardly psychological safety net,
Yeah.
and it destroys communities from the inside out.
So what is the rule the curriculum provides to combat this ostrich game?
It is a golden rule for community health, and if adopted, it would radically change our culture. If I am not part of the problem or its solution, I have no business discussing it, period.
If I am not part of the problem or its solution, I have no business discussing it. Imagine if corporate America adopted that. Imagine if families adopted that. It shuts down 90% of office politics and family drama overnight. Backbiting and muddling aren't just bad habits. They're the active, willful sabotage of human connection.
Which brings us to Lecture Unit 7, the final phase of this deep dive. We've talked about volume, we've talked about strife and dysfunction. Now we look at the nuances of deception. How we use our words to deceive ourselves, deceive others, and desperately try to evade the moral consequences of our speech.
The material gives us 3 incredibly vivid metaphors of deception. Let's look at the first one, the rainless cloud.
A rainless cloud describes someone who boasts of gifts, talents, or resources they simply do not possess. In an agrarian society, a dark cloud blowing in is a promise of life-giving rain. But this person blows in with a lot of thunder and lightning, making grand promises, talking a huge game about what they can achieve, but they never actually produce a drop of rain. They perpetually overpromise and underdeliver. It's a deception of capability, often driven by deep insecurity and a desperate need to be admired.
It's the ultimate imposter syndrome, but weaponized against other people. The second metaphor is the flittering sparrow.
This represents a causeless curse. These are unjustified, harsh words, reactionary condemnations that ultimately have no place to land because they aren't grounded in reality. They just flit around like a panicked bird, causing distraction and anxiety in the room, but they lack the weight of truth.
It makes me think of the kind of knee-jerk cancel culture we see online. People hurling massive existential curses at strangers over minor infractions just to signal their own virtue. It's a flittering sparrow. But the third metaphor is the one that really stuck with me. It is the most striking image of the entire study. The lunatic with a loaded gun.
This is drawn straight from a devastating image in Proverbs. It describes a person who shoots firebrands and deadly arrows, meaning they say cruel, cutting, deeply hurtful, relationship-ending words. And then when they see the damage they've caused, when they see the other person emotionally bleeding out, they casually shrug and say, "Oh, I was just joking."
I was just kidding. Don't be so sensitive. Can't you take a joke? We see this absolutely everywhere today. It is the fundamental defense mechanism of the internet troll. I've heard it called Schrodinger's douchebag. You know, a person who says something incredibly offensive and then decides whether they were being serious or just joking based entirely on the reaction of the audience. But the curriculum doesn't just call this bad humor. It calls this literal madness. Why is this person deemed a lunatic with a loaded gun?
To understand why it's categorized as madness, we have to tie this all the way back to the concept of the divine tape recorder from Unit 2. The material insists that the universe operates on a moral framework, and that framework does not accept the escape clause of, "I didn't mean it."
The intention doesn't undo the impact.
Exactly. When you fire an arrow into someone's chest, it does not matter if you yell, "just kidding," after it hits the target. The physics of the arrow don't change. The damage is real. The blood is drawn. The curriculum argues that claiming it was a joke is just a coward's way of evading moral accountability. It is madness because you are wielding a lethal weapon, your autonomous tongue recklessly, causing profound human suffering, and behaving as if you have no responsibility for the bullets you just fired. It is a complete detachment from reality.
And we are masters at using language to justify this kind of behavior in ourselves, while condemning it in others. The lecture highlights this with a brilliant quote from the secular philosopher Bertrand Russell, proving that this isn't just a religious concept, it's a fundamental flaw in human cognition. Russell pointed out how we conjugate our own behavioral biases. He said, "I am firm, you are stubborn, he is pig-headed."
It perfectly encapsulates the emotive bias of our language.
It is the exact same behavior in all three cases. The objective reality is identical, but we use gentle, virtuous language to justify our own actions. I'm just being firm, I'm holding my ground, while using negative language for the person in front of us. You're stubborn, and deeply insulting language for the person not in the room. He is pig-headed. We use our vocabulary to build a courtroom where we are always the righteous judge and everyone else is the guilty defendant.
Which is why the material concludes that true speech therapy, which is what this entire deep dive has been pointing toward, requires total, unflinching moral accountability for the weight and impact of our words. We have to strip away all of our pious cop-outs, our linguistic biases, our just-kidding escape clauses, and our desperate attempts to maintain our autonomy.
It really is a sweeping, comprehensive teardown of the ego. When you look back at the sheer scale of what Dr. Bahnsen's 7-part curriculum covers, it's breathtaking. We started by looking at the mouth as the ultimate steering wheel of our rebellious autonomy. We moved to the realization that our character is perfectly, inescapably mirrored in our vocabulary, that the Oreo crumbs are permanently smeared on our faces. We confronted the terrifying mathematics of the volume of our speech, realizing that silence isn't awkward, it's often the highest form of wisdom.
We then had to grapple with the manner of our speech. The realization that being factually correct is no excuse for being a volcano, and that true maturity is the craftsmanship of crafting apples of gold in settings of silver. We analyzed the mechanics of strife, recognizing that our body language and our appetite for the dainty morsels of gossip are active, willful choices to cause misery.
We exposed the fool's tools, the harping, the backbiting, the meddling, and saw the cowardice of the ostrich game. We saw how terrifying it is to embrace direct, vulnerable confrontation. And finally, we stripped away our excuses, confronting the madness of the lunatic who fires verbal arrows and cries, "I was just joking."
It is, from start to finish, a total moral checkup. And it forces us to recognize that the ultimate goal here isn't behavior modification. The goal is not just to make you a slightly more polite coworker or a more tolerable dinner guest. The goal is to drive you to the realization that bridling the tongue is the truest, most accurate mark of profound inner transformation. If the heart actually changes, the words must inevitably, undeniably follow.
Which brings us full circle right back to that X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning. We said that measuring the health of the human heart feels like looking into murky water. But the curriculum argues the evidence is not hidden, it is not murky, it is right there, vibrating on our vocal cords every single day.
Right out in the open.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. A thought experiment to carry with you as you step back into your day, as you go to your next meeting, as you sit down at the dinner table with your family, or as you open up your social media apps. Imagine if a strange, sudden new law of nature took effect tomorrow morning. Imagine that every single word you spoke and every word you typed instantly materialized as a permanent, highly visible mark on your physical face. Just like those chocolate Oreo crumbs or that bright red lipstick. Every bit of idle gossip, every harsh tone used with a spouse, every cowardly eye roll, every just joking barb designed to sting, physically, undeniably visible for the entire world to read the moment they looked at you.
How much of your day would you suddenly spend in total unbroken silence?
And what would it take? What kind of radical, internal, heart-level transformation would be required for you to finally feel comfortable letting the people you love read what was written there? This is a terrifying, beautiful question, and it's one worth asking yourself before you speak your next word. Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the source material. We hope it challenged you as deeply as it challenged us. Until next time, keep diving deep.